False spiritual leaders are growing in numbers these days, and it's very important for us to learn how to spot them so that we can closely test their character and protect ourselves from being deceived. What are some of the characteristics of a false preacher? One trait is being a charismatic and gifted communicator, with the inclination for the dramatic. People tend to look for a leader to look up to, so when a well-spoken or entertaining teacher comes along, it's easy for people to believe that he is a true preacher. In Matthew 24 verse 24, it reads,
"For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect."
We have to be cautious because even the people of God can be deceived by a false preacher, who may seemingly be able to uncover mysteries, or even perform signs and wonders. But beware! It is not uncommon for a false preacher to be a gifted communicator, who is able to convince his listeners and win their trust. And he knows the Bible well enough to charismatically twist it to suit his own motives, without being noticed. Another distinguishing character of a false preacher is being pretentious. In 2 Corinthians 11 verses 13 to 15, Apostle Paul warns us about them.
"For such people are false apostles, deceitful workers, masquerading as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It is not surprising then, if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness. Their end will be what their actions deserve."
A false preacher may seem nice. He may seem to have humility and compassion at the pulpit, but really lacks genuine love and regard for the individual growth of his followers. He likes to pretend to work hard for the benefit of people in need. But in reality, he is arrogant, lazy, loves convenience, and he's only driven to work because of his own selfish ambitions. Do not be surprised because even Satan pretends to be an angel of light. How else can one be pretentious? In Galatians 6 verses 3 to 4, it states,
"For if anyone thinks he is something, when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one test his own work. And then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor."
A false leader loves to impress, to display his knowledge, importance, and qualities more than what he actually possesses. He likes to discuss fascinating topics and claims credit for other people's work. Do not be deceived. Being pretentious is a common attribute of a false preacher. Another character flaw of a false preacher is that he hates being corrected or rebuked. Proverbs 12, verse 1 states,
"Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates reproof is stupid."
Everyone makes mistakes, even a spiritual leader. But a false preacher does not welcome witnesses when they bring up reproof. He only loves to be the one doing the rebuking, but hates to receive corrections. He is full of pride and is overly protective of his own image. It is a common practice of a false preacher is to silence those who rebuke him, then cunningly manipulate his followers to only listen to what he says, creating an us versus them, or exclusivism mentality with his followers, even though he knows that this promotes hate instead of unity and love. This is another red flag when you see this happening. Another sign of a false preacher is he loves power and money and is manipulative. Hebrews 13 verse 5 states,
"Keep your life free from love of money, and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you."
Many preachers have good intentions in the beginning, but as they prosper, they end up being corrupted. What leads them to fall away from the faith? The most common root causes are their craving for power and love of money. Because of greed and lack of contentment, trust and faith in God's power, a false leader focuses only on self. And so usually, he also possesses narcissistic qualities like being haughty, non-empathetic, manipulative, egocentric, and having a sense of entitlement and grandiosity. Romans 16 verse 18 states,
Such people are not serving Christ our Lord, they are serving their own personal interests. By smooth talk and glowing words they deceive innocent people.
False leaders, by their smooth talk and manipulative tactics, usually exploit their members' generosity to give, then misuse the monetary offerings. Instead of helping those in need and using the funds in true service, a false leader dishonestly uses it for his own earthly pleasures and possessions. Like buying a nice new house, fancy furniture, costly travel, or lavish lifestyle. He usually cannot work with righteous or strong leaders because they are hard to manipulate, so he places yes-men officers, those he can easily deceive in his leadership, to make it appear that decisions are not made solely by him. Then when an issue arises, a false leader has someone to blame. So watch out and see if your spiritual leader has already become greedy for power and money. And lastly but not the least, in fact this is one of the most telling characteristics of a false teacher, is that they do not practice what they preach. Romans 2 verses 20 to 24 explains,
An instructor of the foolish, a teacher of little children, because you have in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth. You then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? You who preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that people should not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, do you dishonor God by breaking the law? As it is written, God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you.
A false preacher will passionately preach but not passionately live for Christ. He may have an appearance of godliness, but lack its real power. In 1 Timothy 3 verses 8 to 11, it states,
In the same way, deacons are to be worthy of respect, sincere, not indulging in much wine, and not pursuing dishonest gain. They must keep hold of the deep truths of the faith with a clear conscience. They must first be tested, and then if there is nothing against them, let them serve as deacons. In the same way, the women are to be worthy of respect, not malicious talkers but temperate and trustworthy in everything.
As it is written, a spiritual leader keeps hold of the deep truths of faith with a clear conscience. He upholds himself to the highest of standards and manages his own household well. But in contrast, a false leader lacks virtue and is often accompanied by a spiritually immature spouse. These are just some examples of how we can recognize a false preacher. It is wise and prudent to test not just the words being spoken, but more importantly, test the real character of the one speaking. Because we can tell if they are truly of God if what they preach is reflected in their own lives. In part 2 of this topic, we will learn how we can protect ourselves from false preachers.